I'm Master Chief Mark Hakala. I spent 30 years in the Navy, but I've spent my whole life being intrigued by naval customs, traditions, history, heritage, and uniforms. So I'd like to share some of that enthusiasm with you using some items in my personal collection to get us started. Let's see what's in the sea chest today.
The Blue Jacket's Manual. For well over a century, this has been the handbook for the United States Navy sailor. Since 1902, there have been 25 editions of the Blue Jacket's Manual. Most of them you see here. While there have been many similarities amongst the various editions, there's been a lot of diversity as to the content that's been included and to the size of each edition. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a quick look through these things, and I've picked out one thing of interest from each edition to be able to share with you. The first edition from 1902 is much smaller than the edition you see for today. Its cover was made sort of as an envelope so you could tuck in the tongue there and keep it closed. One thing that's interesting about the first several editions is that in addition to the stuff that they include for new recruits, there's also information geared toward petty officers of different ratings as well as chief petty officers. As an example of something I found quite interesting in this is if you look at this chart of the alphabetical signal flags, you're going to see something a little bit different, especially for the first several letters. You see that the flags for the letters C through G are not the same as they are today. All of those are pennants, whereas nowadays they're square flags. In the early editions of the Blue Jacket's Manual, there was a little bit of confusion in the numbering system. The issuances that were published in 1903, 1904, 1905, 1907, 1908, 1911, 1913, 14, and 15, all of those are second editions. However, some of them on one of the pages might say that it's the fourth or the fifth or another different edition. Although the book's content originated in the same place, several different publishers were used to actually print the book, and so that's probably where some of the confusion comes from. This is a second/fifth edition from 1908. It's gotten a little bit bigger than the first edition, which was 304 pages. This is now 407 pages. One of the things that caught my eye as I was flipping through this edition was that although we were already in the 20th century, we were already committed to a totally steel, totally steam Navy, how much emphasis is put in these diagrams on how sails are constructed, the various parts of them, the lines that go to them, and everything else. I guess it's always a good idea to have a backup form of propulsion. Here's another one of the second editions, this one from 1914. While still in that second edition range, the difference between this and the 1908 is significant in that the 1908 was 407 pages. This is more than doubled to 849 pages. One thing in this volume I found interesting was the detail that was paid to marksmanship training. And here you can see illustrations of the various positions used at the firing line. Here's the fourth edition from 1916. Size-wise, it's not that much different at 821 pages. But as I had mentioned, many of these early editions include information for petty officers and chiefs of different ratings. So this one has a lot of detail on the bosun's pipe, the call, including illustrations of the various hand positions. There's actually 4: open, curved, closed, and clinched. Most people nowadays can only do 2, as well as somewhat musical scores showing how the various calls are to be piped. Fifth edition, 1917. Size-wise, identical, 821 pages. Of interest here is they're still teaching the system of bearings from the ship based on points. As you can see in the illustration here, 1 point off the starboard bow, 2 points off the starboard bow. So they're using this instead of the 360-degree bearing system. This would actually continue through the next several editions of the Blue Jackets Manual. Sixth edition, 1918. Once again, the exact same size, 821 pages. At this time, being part of a naval landing party was still a common occurrence, and so sailors had to train in all forms of infantry, including the manual of arms. Anybody familiar with the modern-day manual of arms won't find too many differences amongst these, but there are a couple that are quite interesting. If you look on the left-hand page, the bottom two figures, the one that says slope arms is what we would now call left shoulder arms. And you see the parade rest has the muzzle of the rifle in front of the body and the right foot 1 pace back. If you look immediately next to that one on the next page, you'll see a position that's probably not familiar to too many people called secure arms. The rifle is carried under the right arm with the barrel down and the muzzle pointing toward the deck. This would be used if you were on the march and it was raining outside. Sixth edition of 1922. Although still a 6th edition, this has shrunk significantly from 821 to 518 pages. We're past World War I at this stage, and yet they still thought it important that sailors be able to recognize the different kinds of sailing vessels. So you'll see in this one, if you look at the top left, that it's only a very specific kind of sailing vessel that's called a ship. Square-rigged, 3 or 4 masts. Look down at the bottom row, second one from the left. That's an unusual name. I don't know if it would be called a hermaphrodite brig if they had to name this kind of vessel today. Seventh edition, 1927. Now it's beefed up again, up to 908 pages. Here's an illustration that should enable any modern sailor to count his or her blessings. You see at this time that if you were working with small boats, more than likely you would have been the form of propulsion. That's right, oar power. The 8th edition, 1938. This drops just a little bit in size to 836 pages. And once again, there's something for the modern sailor that goes into the category of thank your lucky stars. Here you see the proper layout of your own portable bed. Yes, that's right, a hammock. You see at the base, there's the canvas hammock itself, the system of lines that enables it to be secured called a clew, and it has your mattress, blankets, and sheets. When you transferred from one ship to another, you would roll this up as a big long tube and then curl it around your sea bag. So you literally had your home and your possessions all over your shoulder as you moved. Tenth edition, 1940. It's shrunk a little bit in size to 784 pages. And I've gone to the signal flag page. You can see by this time that the signal flags have changed from the C through G that were pennants before to the current versions. What you can also see is that there's now a phonetic alphabet. However, it is definitely not the phonetic alphabet that's in use today. You see the letters affirm, baker, cast, dog, easy, fox, and George, instead of Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf. Now, what makes this even crazier is that the Army used a completely different phonetic alphabet. Instead of Affirm, Baker, Cast, they used Able, Baker, Charlie. And the two of these wouldn't merge until after World War II. The 11th edition, 1943. Now this one is the largest one that has ever been published, 1,145 pages. There's tons of information in this one that nowadays you might find only in training manuals for specific ratings. This was one thing that I liked. There are some very well-drawn color illustrations on how to tie various decorative yet functional knots and how to do whippings. These, I think, are done well enough that probably just about anybody could go ahead and tie one of these. Twelfth edition, 1944. This one was nearly cut in half in size, going from over 1,100 pages down to 585. I found an interesting photograph in this. It's not the clearest, but if you look carefully at the enlisted sailors here, they are wearing white hats that have been dyed blue. Although it wasn't 100% universal during World War II, a good proportion of ships required their enlisted personnel to dye several of their white hats blue to be worn with dungarees. That way they could be worn for dirty work and they wouldn't have to be maintained in inspection condition. Post-war, 1946, 13th edition. This one's gotten a little bit bigger at 621 pages. And I really liked in the section on deck seamanship this illustration. You see it shows the various steps in how to pick up, hold, and cast a heaving line with a monkey's fist. Actually pretty well drawn compared to some of the illustrations in other editions of the book. Fourteenth edition, 1950, into the Korean War era. We've jumped in size from 621 to 828 pages. There's a great photo in this one. Here you see a bunch of recruits lined up, and each has his sea bag and all its contents laid out perfectly for inspection in front of them. And take a look at the uniform they're wearing. This is dungarees, blue denim trousers, and a light blue chambray shirt. But you also see that the sailors are wearing leggings. And you see that the combination of the leggings and the shoes gives the appearance of boots. This is where we get the expression boot camp. This particular copy of this volume was my father's when he went through OCS. Sixteenth edition, 1960. We've dropped down from 828 to 637 pages. If you go back to some of the very early volumes and take a look at how they're laid out, almost all the information presented is in a question and answer format. So you would learn, let's say, the proper way to salute by reading the question, what is the proper way to salute? That's the Q, and then the A would be, it would give the details on how to salute. This version gives you the information throughout the chapter, but at the end, they give you quizzes. So a little bit different take on things. Seventeenth edition, 1963. Increased in size a little, 637 to 679 pages. One of the things you find pretty much common to all the editions of the Blue Jackets manual is a section on the benefits of staying in the service. They run through the benefits of free lodging, free meals, free health care, and a retirement check if you put in a full career. By this edition, they're given the hard sell, though. They talk about opportunities for recreation and excitement. So here they show you the Navy taking you around the world, and you can get to be a tourist at famous sites like the Colosseum in Rome. I want you to remember this picture so that you can compare it to one they have in a future edition. Eighteenth edition, 1968. It's grown from 679 to 756 pages. These photographs show the various male enlisted uniforms that were in use at this time. Perhaps the most interesting thing is, out of these 8 uniforms shown, there's only one that's still in use. In the top row, top left, you see service dress blue. which we still use. And 2 over, you see service dress white. Now, we have that uniform, but the jumper's different nowadays, with the piping on the collar and cuffs. Next to each of those, you see something that most people have probably never heard of, an undress uniform, undress blue and undress white. Now, the undress blue jumper, that was different in that it had open cuff and no piping on the cuff or the collar. The undress white was the same as the service dress white, it was just worn without the neckerchief. 19th edition, 1973, the beginning of the dreaded era of the suit and tie uniform for E6 and below sailors. The volume has dropped from 756 to 644 pages. The photo on the right definitely caught my attention. I'm old enough to remember when women's hairstyles like this required an entire can of Aquanet hairspray to hold those big curls. And I definitely wouldn't want to have a spark or an open flame around these two because that hairspray was highly inflammable. They'd go up like a Christmas tree. Twentieth edition, 1978. It's dropped a little bit, 644 to 611 pages. This was my personal copy that I was issued when I got to Recruit Training Command Great Lakes in July of 1981. One photo I always liked in this is they show an entire boot camp company that's marching in service dress blue uniforms. They had just, at the time of publication of this volume, started returning to this uniform. They had found that a suit and tie and a combination cap didn't look too good after they'd been squeezed into a tiny locker aboard ship. '21st edition, 1990, jumped from 611 to 771 pages. As I'd mentioned before, most of these volumes devote some space to trying to convey to you the advantages of staying in the Navy, how good you've got it in the service. Now, that previous example, they show you being a tourist in this wonderful ancient city of Rome, seeing classic structures left over from the golden days of the Roman Empire. Here they show you checking out a set of golf clubs from MWR, being in your working uniform, and having to figure out how to play golf all on your own. I don't play golf, but looking at this picture, I get the impression he's not doing something right. '22nd edition, 1998, dropped from 771 to 643 pages. And I absolutely adore this picture. Here you see the tough, gnarly old chief until it's time to have to get a shot. The 23rd edition wasn't actually called that. It was actually entitled the Centennial edition because it came out in 2002, 100 years after the first edition in 1902. It stayed about the same size, 648 pages. And I thought this photo was kind of interesting. Just the pose, the posture as this sailor performs semaphore. I don't know, he kind of looks like an action signalman. '24th edition, 2009. Only a little bit bigger at 676 pages. I thought this was interesting. This shows the introduction of 2 new uniforms. The Navy Working Uniform Type 1, or the Blueberries, which has come and gone, and the Service Uniform for E6 and below. Finally, the 25th edition, 2017. This jumped from 676 to 754 pages. One of the things I loved best about this edition was that there were color photographs throughout. Brought so much life to the visual presentation. I was lucky enough to be afforded the very great honor of working on this edition. In my spare time, I put in many, many hours as the executive editor. And Tom Cutler of the U.S. Naval Institute, who's written the past several editions of the Blue Jackets manual, has assembled his editorial team to start work on the 26th edition, so it's time to get back to work.
Check back soon for more content. Thanks for watching.